On my deathbed, I had managed to choke out one last sentence to my girlfriend, telling her that the very sight of her made me sick. But as my eyes slipped shut, I saw my grandmother standing beside the old woman, smiling and beckoning me forward. All the friends I thought were gone forever were lined up there too, waiting for me to join them, even as my real-world breathing faltered and the heart monitor flatlined. For the first time, I wasn't a patient or a stand-in or a killer. I was just a child who was finally going home. On the same day the doctors gave me my terminal diagnosis, I happened to stumble upon my girlfriend's diary. She had written that Lucas was becoming less and less like him, and questioned if she should just break up with me. It took that devastating moment for me to finally realize that I was nothing more than a cheap, disposable replacement. Eventually, I lost all will to keep fighting and just lay in a hospital bed through rounds of useless treatments. Olivia would sit there with bloodshot eyes, sobbing and begging me not to leave her. Thinking back to the start, I remember stumbling out of the clinic after the diagnosis, desperate to find her and just break down in her arms. Olivia was the only person in this world who truly mattered to me. I couldn't even fathom how heartbroken she would be once she heard the news about my cancer. I searched everywhere for her that afternoon, but she was nowhere to be found. I sat at our kitchen table in a daze, pulling the medical report out of my bag to read it again and again. I had this foolish hope that if I stared at the words long enough, a miracle might appear between the lines. Instead, the words stomach cancer just kept piercing my vision like jagged needles. Tears began to stream down my face, and I reached up to wipe them away before they hit the paper. That was when I noticed Olivia's journal sitting wide open on the desk. She must have been in a hurry and forgotten to tuck it away after her last entry. I reached out to close the notebook for her, but my own name on the final page caught my eye. It said that Lucas was losing his resemblance to him and wondered if it was time to end things. I checked the date at the top of the page. It was dated today. My heart stopped as a single question raced through my mind, wondering who this other man was. I began flipping back through the pages, reading her accounts of our entire relationship from the day we met. To my horror, nearly every single entry made some reference to this mysterious person. A loose photograph suddenly slid out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. I stood there frozen as I picked it up and realized the man in the picture looked almost exactly like me. On the back, written in neat cursive, were the words, "Forever Love, Daniel Miller." I recognized the name immediately because Daniel Miller was Olivia's first love. Everything finally clicked into place. All the little red flags and memories I had intentionally ignored came rushing back to haunt me. My head started spinning, and my hands shook with a mix of shock and rage. It was clear now that in Olivia's eyes, I was nothing more than a placeholder for her first love. I was still trying to process the betrayal when I heard the front door click open. Olivia walked in while talking on her phone, wearing a shy, flirtatious smile I hadn't seen in years. The moment she spotted me, her expression went cold and the smile vanished instantly. She instinctively covered the microphone with her hand and glared at me, asking why I was home so early. She was right to be surprised since I was usually chained to my desk at the office during these hours. I had been killing myself with overtime just to afford a better life for her and a beautiful wedding. I had literally destroyed my health for her, only to find out her entire heart was a lie. I looked her in the eye while clutching the cancer report in my trembling hand, my voice sounding raw and broken. I told her right then and there that we were over and that I wanted to break up. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room because she never expected me to be the one to leave. Before she could even respond to me, a crashing sound erupted from her phone. A man's frantic voice came through the speaker, calling her Tiffany and telling her he had been in a wreck. She didn't hesitate for a second, screaming that she was on her way. Olivia didn't even stop to put on real shoes. She just bolted for the door in her slippers. She was halfway out when she finally remembered I was standing there. She gave me a fleeting look and told me we would finish the conversation when she got back. I couldn't help but laugh because there was no way I was waiting for her. I grabbed a few of my things and walked out of that apartment for good. I hadn't even made it a few blocks before a wave of agonizing pain hit me, sending me collapsing onto the sidewalk. When I finally came to, I realized a Good Samaritan had called an ambulance, and I was back at the hospital. The emergency room was a chaotic mess of people and noise. I was hooked up to N4 in a treatment bay, and a nurse had kindly pulled the curtain to give me some privacy. A few minutes later, I heard the gurney wheels as they rolled another patient into the spot right next to mine. A familiar voice drifted through the curtain that made my blood run cold. It was Olivia, crying out for Jerry and begging him not to be badly hurt. It was definitely her, and her voice was thick with genuine terror and devotion. The attending physician sounded almost annoyed as he told her that her boyfriend only had a broken finger. He assured her it wasn't a life-threatening emergency and told her to calm down. Olivia went quiet for a second before whispering a soft thank you to the doctor. Jerry let out a smug little laugh from his bed and thanked the staff as well. The doctor kept joking around, telling Jerry he should marry her immediately because girls that devoted were hard to find these days. Jerry agreed that Olivia was a gem and said that any man who married her would be the luckiest guy alive. Olivia told him to stop being silly and said she was going to go handle his admission paperwork. She sounded like she was blushing as she gave him a playful scold and hurried out of the room. Once the doctor left, the area became quiet again. I lay there staring at the cold fluid as it dripped slowly into my veins. It felt as though I had been shoved into an industrial freezer, and my entire soul was turning to ice. I couldn't take it anymore and ripped the 4-needle out of my arm, desperate to escape. Right as I sat up, a phone started ringing on the other side of the curtain. Jerry answered it, his voice harsh as he told the caller to stop bothering him. He snarled into the phone, asking why he should care about some girl's miscarriage since he wasn't even sure the kid was his. He told her to go kill herself somewhere else and to leave him alone. He reminded her that they had only hooked up a few times and told her she was nothing more than a cheap bar girl. Jerry slammed the phone down, but it started buzzing again almost instantly. This time, his voice turned oily and submissive as he told someone named Rick that he would have the money soon. He told Rick he had found a new girl who was even hotter than the last one and offered her up for Rick to use in exchange for a lower interest rate on his debt. I didn't let him finish the sentence before my rage boiled over. I ripped back the curtain and lunged at him, burying my fist into his smug face. I screamed a curse at him as I connected. I rained punches down on him, catching him completely off guard. I was acting like a madman, fueled by the self-loathing of being a replacement and the fury that Olivia was so blind. I didn't stop until Olivia came running back and threw her weight into pulling me off of him, screaming for me to stop. Her paperwork went flying across the floor as the room descended into total chaos. I just stared at her with bloodshot eyes, a million things to say, but no voice to say them. Olivia looked at me, and her shock quickly curdled into a look of pure disgust as she asked if I had been stalking her. I stood there in shock, unable to believe those were the first words out of her mouth. She looked at me with total annoyance and told me that even though we were dating, I had no right to meddle in her personal business. Between the cancer in my gut and the rage in my chest, I started shaking uncontrollably from the pain. I gritted my teeth and asked her if her personal life usually involved bringing other men to the hospital. I shot a pointed, hateful look at Jerry. Her face turned bright red with defensive fury as she asked how I could be so narrow-minded. She screamed at me, asking if she wasn't allowed to have any male friends or if she was supposed to be my slave. In that moment, the woman screaming at me felt like a complete stranger. I turned my back to leave, but Jerry wasn't about to let a chance for a payday slip by. He started yelling that I couldn't just walk away after assaulting him. He demanded a settlement for emotional distress and threatened to call the cops and press charges for battery if I didn't pay up. Jerry kept up his pathetic, snide threats from the hospital bed. I was about to laugh in his face, but Olivia cut me off by urgently telling me to just pay him. She said it was better to lose some money than to end up in a prison cell. She grabbed my arm, pretending to be concerned for my well-being while telling me I needed to apologize. She said if I just said sorry and handed over some cash, the whole thing would go away. She even had the nerve to say he would forgive me as a favor to her. All she could talk about was Jerry, repeating his name over and over. It was like she had completely forgotten the sweet way she used to say my name. The intimacy we once shared was officially dead. I realized then that I was just the understudy and the lead actor had finally returned to the stage. I gave a bitter laugh and shoved her hand away, smoothing out my shirt. I took one last look around the room before pinning my gaze on Olivia. I told Jerry he wasn't getting a cent from me. He tried to lunge out of bed to hit me, but stopped himself when he remembered Olivia was watching. She bit her lip and gave him a pathetic, apologetic look before telling him she needed to go deal with me. She dragged me down to the hospital parking lot and started screaming at me. She kept insisting they were just friends and asked why I was being so difficult. The freezing Chicago wind cut through my jacket, and my stomach began to cramp with agonizing precision. I looked at her with a dead expression and asked if she actually believed the lies coming out of her mouth. I told her I knew the truth and mocked her for finding a replacement who even shared a similar name. I asked if she picked me just so she wouldn't accidentally moan the wrong name in the heat of the moment. She slapped me across the face so hard I could immediately taste blood in my mouth. She told me she couldn't believe I was such a disgusting person. She screamed that Jerry was important to her and that I had no right to insult them. Olivia was shaking with rage as she finished her tirade. Then she turned on her heel and walked away without looking back. My vision blurred and my head started spinning as I watched her go. My body finally gave out and I collapsed onto the freezing pavement. I blacked out again, my body finally surrendering to the trauma. The constant fainting and the unrelenting pain were clear reminders that my time was running out. In that moment of darkness, I found myself wishing it would all just end right there. I didn't have anything left to live for anyway. I had been an orphan since I was 3 years old, when my parents were killed in a horrific car wreck. After that, my grandmother was the only person in the world who cared enough to raise me. She was my entire world, but she passed away 3 years ago and left me completely alone. I felt hollowed out, a man without a compass or a reason to wake up in the morning. For a long time, I was so traumatized that I couldn't even bring myself to speak. Then Olivia came along and pulled me out of the wreckage of my life. She was so kind and gentle, like a ray of sun that slowly thawed my frozen heart. She was beautiful and had plenty of guys chasing her, yet she chose to walk right past them to get to me. Back then, I was broke and had absolutely nothing to offer her. She didn't care and stayed by my side anyway, never complaining about her situation. We used to eat those cheap, bulk deal frozen meals every day, and she always acted like she was perfectly happy. I vowed never to let her down because of that devotion. I worked myself to the bone, obsessed with the idea of buying her a house and giving her the life she deserved. I really believed we were soulmates and that our happy ending was just around the corner. It took until today to realize my entire life was just a cruel punchline. I closed my eyes in the cold, ready to let go of everything. But then a voice started calling out to me, dragging me back from the edge of the abyss. It was a persistent, worried voice that refused to let me drift away into the dark. I managed to pry one eye open to see who was making all that noise. I found myself looking up at a kind, elderly face that made my heart stop. I whispered the word grandma before I could even think. The old woman asked what I was talking about as she hovered over me. She told me it was far too cold to be sleeping on the ground and urged me to get up and go home. She kept fussing over me as she tried to help me up. I couldn't process a single word she said. I just reached out and clung to her like a lifeline. I kept sobbing for my grandmother, telling her how much I missed her and begging her to take me with her. I told her that life was too painful and that I didn't have a home anymore. I was barely conscious as I rambled, but somehow she seemed to understand my pain. She told me that if I didn't mind her humble place, I could stay with her for free. She stroked my hair and told me it was okay to cry, calling me a poor, lost soul. The wind was still biting, but she felt incredibly warm. She didn't seem bothered at all by a grown man sobbing in her arms, and she held me with a motherly tenderness I hadn't felt in years. She kept patting my back and told me I was welcome to stay with her for as long as I needed. I woke up the next morning to the incredible smell of home-cooked food. The room was bathed in bright, golden sunlight that reached into every corner. It felt so warm and peaceful that for a moment I thought I was dreaming. I looked around and saw that the small house was simple but meticulously clean. The furniture had seen better days, but the whole place had an aura of serenity. I followed the scent of the food and saw the old woman busy at the stove in the kitchen. Seeing her from behind brought back a flood of childhood memories, and I felt the tension in my chest finally begin to melt. I stood there in silence until she turned around with a tray of food and spotted me. She gave me a warm smile and told me it was time for breakfast. She gestured for me to join her at the table, and I sat down without a word. We ate in a comfortable silence. She didn't press me for details about my life or why I'd been collapsed on the street. She must have noticed me carefully avoiding the spicy peppers because she quietly swapped the dish for something much milder. Before I headed out, I took every last dollar I had and tried to press the cash into her hand. She tried to refuse the money, but her eyes landed on the photo tucked inside my wallet and she froze. It was an old, yellowed picture of my grandmother from when she was a young woman. It was the only thing I had left of her after cleaning out her house years ago. The woman snatched the wallet from my hand and stared at the photograph with trembling lips. She looked at it for what felt like an eternity before her voice broke. She whispered the word "sister" and started to cry. I was completely floored by those two words, thinking I must have heard her wrong. My grandmother had never mentioned having any living family. The old woman sat me down and explained that my grandmother had married and moved far away when they were both very young. Between the lack of technology and the chaos of the times, the two sisters had slowly lost touch. By the time this woman married, she had completely lost all contact with my grandmother. I stood there in total disbelief at the coincidence. It explained why I felt such an immediate bond with her. It explained why the sight of her from behind felt so much like home. I like to think that my grandmother saw me struggling in the dark and decided to guide her sister into my life to keep me from being alone. The realization hit me so hard that I finally broke down. I threw my arms around her and sobbed into her shoulder until her shirt was completely soaked with my tears. I ended up moving in with her, and we lived a very quiet, simple life. We were out in the suburbs of Chicago, and she supported herself by tending to a large vegetable garden in the front yard. Every morning at dawn, she would head out with her basket to sell her fresh produce to the neighbors. Everyone in the area loved her because her prices were fair and her food was fresh. People would often slip her extra supplies or household goods as a thank you. Walking by her side was the first time I had ever felt that kind of pure, simple human kindness. That peace was shattered one afternoon when we returned from the garden. As we reached the gate, we heard a man's voice screaming at her to hand over her hidden cash. I dropped my basket of vegetables and grabbed a heavy shovel from the porch before charging inside. I saw a man with his hands around the old woman's throat, pinning her against the wall. I roared at him to let her go immediately. I swung the shovel with everything I had, catching him hard enough to make him howl in pain. He turned around to fight me, but we both froze the moment our eyes met. It was Jerry. He recovered first and demanded to know what I was doing there. He told me to mind my own business and warned me that he wasn't related to me. He told me to stop playing the hero and to get lost before he made me regret it. Before I could say a word, the old woman grabbed a broom from the corner and started beating Jerry with it. She chased him toward the door, cursing him out with every swing. Jerry was so busy dodging the broom that he completely ignored me. Jerry finally got fed up and snatched the broom out of her hands, shoving her away with a violent swing. She lost her footing and tumbled backward onto the floor. Jerry loomed over her and reminded her that he was the only grandson the Miller family had left. He screamed that everything she owned belonged to him and threatened to sell the house if she didn't give him the cash. He lunged at her to search her pockets, and something inside me finally snapped. A searing rage took over my entire body. I swung the shovel again with zero hesitation or mercy. The blow sent Jerry flying through the air and landing face first in the chicken coop. He was covered in filth and screaming in agony as the impact registered. I slammed the shovel into the dirt and stood between him and the old woman. I gave him a choice to leave now or never leave at all. My intent was lethal, and he knew it. Seeing the look in my eyes, Jerry's bravado vanished instantly. He looked ridiculous as he scrambled out of the coop with chicken feathers stuck to his face and hair. He yelled that he wasn't scared and promised he would be back to settle the score. He took off running after that final empty threat. I rushed over to help the old woman up and guided her to a chair on the porch. Once she caught her breath, she finally began to tell me the truth about Jerry. Jerry's parents had split up when he was just a toddler. Both of them started new families and couldn't be bothered with him, so he became the child that nobody wanted. The old woman was the only one who stepped up to raise him. She had poured her life into him, only to be repaid with violence and greed. He was constantly in trouble and was now trying to steal the only thing she had left, her home. It was then I realized that Jerry really was her grandson, and we were actually related. It made sense why he shared my features. In the end, he was my cousin. I had to laugh at the bitter irony of the situation. Olivia really had a talent for picking men. She managed to find my own cousin to replace me with. The problem was that Jerry didn't have a shred of the old woman's kindness. He was a petty, vengeful man who was definitely going to come back for blood. I tried to convince her to move into the city with me for her own safety. She refused, saying she had spent her whole life in that house, and it was all she had left of her husband. She made it clear she was staying there until the day she died. Her stubbornness was giving me a massive headache. We couldn't leave, but staying was becoming a death trap. That was when I remembered someone who might be able to help, and a plan started to form. Exactly as I predicted, Jerry showed up the next day with a group of thugs in tow. I was in the middle of preparing a huge batch of dumplings in the yard when they arrived. I had plates of them spread out across the outdoor table. Jerry looked genuinely surprised to see me still hanging around. He made a snide comment about me having the time to cook before turning to a massive, muscular guy he called Rick. He pointed at me and told Rick I was the one they were looking for. Jerry lied through his teeth, telling Rick that I had stolen all of the old woman's money and was blocking the sale of the house. He promised Rick that if he handled me, the debt would be paid in full immediately. I looked at him and wondered how Olivia could have ever fallen for such a pathetic loser. I just wiped the sweat from my brow and kept working, completely ignoring them. I knew my backup was only minutes away. Rick didn't appreciate being ignored and started barking at me, demanding to know who I thought I was and why I wasn't showing him any respect. I took my time finishing the last dumpling before leisurely washing my hands. I finally turned around with a bored expression, acting as if I had only just noticed they were standing there. I told Rick I had never heard of him while drying my hands on a towel. I calmly informed them that Officer Thompson was on his way and suggested they might want to leave before he arrived. Rick burst out laughing and asked if I really thought he was scared as a guy named Thompson. He told me to tell Thompson to bring backup. I just shook my head and held up 2 fingers, telling him that 2 people would be more than enough to handle this. The group looked at each other and started howling with laughter, mocking me for my confidence. They couldn't believe I was so arrogant. I didn't bother responding and just gave them a thin, knowing smile. Right on cue, a loud voice boomed from the front gate, calling Rick out by name. I told them my guest had arrived. Everyone turned toward the gate to see 2 men standing there. They were stunned to see 2 uniformed police officers walking toward them. My reinforcements were exactly who I said they'd be. Officer Thompson had been a regular at the old woman's vegetable stand for years and often stopped by after his shift. I had gotten to know him pretty well over the last few weeks. When I heard the precinct needed a catering order of handmade dumplings, I volunteered for the job. Today just happened to be the scheduled time for him to pick them up. Jerry and Rick were completely speechless as the reality of the situation set in. Officer Thompson didn't waste any time taking them into custody. He hauled them off to the station on charges of criminal harassment and attempted assault. As they were being loaded into the squad car, Jerry shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked like he was losing his mind with rage. He clearly expected a fist fight and was caught off guard by me using the law against him. When your life is on the line, calling the cops is always the smarter play. I couldn't believe he was still living in some fantasy world where problems are solved with playground brawls. It was honestly pathetic how ignorant he was. I went down to the station to finish my formal statement. I was just about to leave when Olivia came bursting through the front doors. The second she saw me, she flew into a blind rage and started lunging at me, trying to claw my face. She screamed at me, demanding to know what I had done to Daniel and why he was behind bars. She kept shouting that it was all my fault and tried to drag me back to the intake desk to take back my statement. I shoved her hands off me and told her to get her facts straight. I explained that Jerry was the one who came to our home with a gang of criminals looking for a fight. I told Olivia that her taste in men was absolute garbage. She refused to listen, screaming that it was impossible and that Jerry would never do something like that. She kept making pathetic excuses for his behavior. I was done watching her meltdown and turned to leave the station. Right then, Officer Thompson walked into the lobby and asked Olivia if she was Jerry's next of kin. He told her she arrived just in time because they had just linked Jerry to several major fraud cases and needed to question her. Officer Thompson was calm and professional as he broke the news. Olivia's eyes went wide with shock, and she started stammering that there must be a mistake. She kept insisting Jerry was a good, kind person who had helped her in the past. Officer Thompson told her that the evidence was overwhelming. He explained that Jerry was a predator who specialized in manipulating women who had once loved him. He would drain the wealthy ones of their savings and sexually exploit the ones who were broke, sometimes even forcing them into the sex trade. The officer told her that everything had been verified and said she was lucky she hadn't been with him longer. He advised her to walk away while she still could. Olivia looked like someone had cut her strings, and she just crumpled onto a nearby bench, whispering in disbelief. She looked like a hollow shell as she sat there muttering to herself. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity for her. With the little time I had left, my only priority was caring for the old woman and staying far away from this drama. I was halfway to the door when Olivia suddenly snapped out of it and lunged at me, grabbing my hand. She demanded to know where I was going and why I hadn't been home for weeks. She seemed desperate to know where I was staying. I shook her off with total disgust, not wanting to spend another second in her presence. I told her to have some dignity and reminded her that we were finished. I pointed toward the holding cells and told her that her precious Jerry was exactly where he belonged. She started sobbing that she wouldn't accept the breakup. She admitted she made a mistake and begged for one more chance, promising that she would be the perfect girlfriend and never cause drama again. I gave a cold laugh and recited her own diary entry back to her from memory. I asked her why she was pretending to care now when she had been planning to dump me for months. Her face went pale as she realized I had read her journal. Her face drained of all color as I spoke those words. Her grip on my arm weakened until her hand just fell away. She was left completely speechless by her own betrayal. What she never bothered to notice was that I had lost 20 pounds because of the cancer eating me alive. That was the only reason I didn't look like Jerry anymore. It proved that she had never once looked at me and seen the real Lucas. I was just a placeholder in her life, a stand-in for a ghost. But I didn't feel any sadness about it anymore. I felt relieved that I didn't have to spend another day begging for her affection. I finally realized I actually had real family left in this world. After getting home, I started the process of selling off all my assets. I sold my car and liquidated my savings, wanting to make sure everything was in order. Somewhere during all that paperwork, I had a realization. I actually wanted to live. I wanted to be there to take care of the old woman until the very end, and she gave me a reason to keep fighting. I decided to start fighting the cancer and began an aggressive round of treatments. I endured the constant IVs and the agonizing side effects of chemo without complaining. The old woman never asked about my appointments, but the look in her eyes told me she knew exactly what was happening. She spent her days making me nourishing soups and would snatch the gardening tools out of my hands to force me to go lie down. It felt just like being a kid again. I was finally being looked after and loved for who I actually was. For a while, I lived a peaceful, carefree life where my only worries were our lunch menu and the health of our garden. That peace lasted until the day Olivia managed to track me down again. My real estate agent called saying someone wanted to buy my old house and needed me to sign the final papers. When I showed up at the meeting, I was disgusted to see Olivia's mother sitting there. I knew immediately that this whole thing was just a ploy to get their hands on my property. The second she saw me, She dropped to her knees with a dramatic thud. She started wailing and begging me to forgive her daughter. Olivia was standing right behind her with her head down, trying her best to look like a victim. I felt nothing but pure revulsion for both of them. Olivia's mother had always treated me like dirt under her shoe. Back when we first started dating, she went out of her way to make my life a living hell every chance she got. She used to spend her time insulting me and making snide remarks about my lack of social standing. At the end of the day, she just thought I was too poor for her daughter. I had destroyed my health working 3 jobs just to prove her wrong, and look where it got me. My reward for all that hard work was a terminal cancer diagnosis. That woman was one of the primary reasons I was dying. The fact that she had the audacity to ask for my forgiveness was beyond insulting. I shoved her away and turned to walk out of the office. She lunged forward and grabbed onto my leg, refusing to let me leave until I listened to her. She begged me to stay, claiming that Olivia was devastated and full of regret. She tried to blame everything on Jerry, saying Olivia was just a confused girl who had been tricked by a master manipulator. She even tried to guilt-trip me by saying Olivia was so depressed she wasn't eating and might do something drastic. I almost laughed out loud at the theater of it all. Olivia wouldn't have been tricked if she hadn't been looking for an excuse to cheat in the first place. The truth was they were just terrified of losing their meal ticket. We were supposed to be getting married, and they wanted their piece of the pie. That house was the only thing I had left of my parents, and I wasn't about to hand it over to them. We weren't married, so she had zero legal claim to any of my property. She was just bitter about losing the house and was acting like she was the star of some tragic soap opera. She actually thought that a few fake tears would convince me to hand over the deed to my house for free. I tried to shake her off, but she was clinging to my leg with a desperate, animal-like strength that I couldn't break. I barked at her to let go of me, my voice full of a cold, hard finality. She looked shocked, as if she finally realized my patience was gone. Despite that, she kept her grip and started nodding frantically at Olivia to join in. Olivia stepped forward with tear-streaked cheeks and started her practiced apology. She swore that nothing physical had happened between her and Jerry and begged me not to leave her. She kept repeating that she loved me, which just made me sick to my stomach. I was done being treated like an idiot, so I finally put some force into it and shoved her mother off of me. The woman fell back onto the floor and immediately started screaming at the top of her lungs like she was being murdered. I didn't feel even a flicker of guilt. I just wanted the circus to end. I told them both to never speak to me again and walked toward the exit. Olivia grabbed my arm again, sobbing that she truly loved me. She tried to explain that her obsession with Jerry was just a lingering childhood crush that she hadn't known how to let go of. She kept crying about how I was the best thing that ever happened to her and that she'd never find another man like me. I was about to shove her away when her mother scrambled to her feet and started screaming for the entire neighborhood to come watch us. She started shouting about how I was a heartless scumbag who was abandoning a poor, innocent girl after using her. A crowd started to gather on the sidewalk, people whispering and pointing their fingers at us. To my surprise, most of the onlookers weren't buying her act. I heard several people whispering about how she was the one who had been caught cheating. They were disgusted that she had the nerve to make a scene in public after what she did. One guy loudly remarked that they were probably just throwing a fit because their meal ticket had finally cut them off. Olivia's mother turned bright red as the crowd's insults started to hit home. She had clearly planned to demand some kind of settlement, but now she was too humiliated to speak. She grabbed Olivia by the arm and yanked her away, telling her to just let me go and that I wasn't worth the trouble. Her mother snarled that Olivia could do better than a broke loser like me anyway. Olivia was hysterical, screaming that she didn't want anyone else and fighting to get back to me. Her mother ended the argument with a vicious slap across Olivia's face. The whole situation turned into a screaming match between the two of them. I took that opportunity to walk away, done with both of them forever. I realized that even a single word wasted on them was too much. Olivia's pathetic begging continued in the background, but I was focused on finally closing this chapter of my life. I was nearly in my car when Officer Thompson came running toward me. He grabbed my shoulder with a grim expression and told me there had been an emergency at the house. My legs nearly gave out as the blood drained from my face. Officer Thompson explained that Jerry had managed to escape custody while being transported to a medical clinic. He had tried to hide out with his parents first, but both of them had slammed the door in his face. With nowhere left to turn, he had doubled back to the old woman's house in the suburbs. He had tried to beat the old woman into giving him her savings so he could flee the state. When she refused, things turned violent. In a struggle, he ended up taking her life. Jerry had murdered her. By the time I reached the house, the yard was a crime scene covered in blood. She was lying on the frozen ground, and I saw that her hand was still clutching a bag of the small persimmons she knew were my favorite. I stood there in total shock, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was all just a horrible nightmare. I didn't even realize I was crying until the tears started hitting the ground. All the memories of her kindness and her fussing over my meals started playing like a movie in my head. Time seemed to grind to a halt as I stood there in the middle of the yard. I could see the officers moving around me and felt someone put a hand on my shoulder, but everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. I had only one thought left in my broken mind, and that was that Jerry had to die. They caught him a few blocks away not long after I arrived. Officer Thompson brought him back to the house to walk through the crime scene for the detectives. As they led him past me, he leaned in with a sickening, malicious grin and whispered that he had enjoyed my girlfriend just as much as he enjoyed killing our relative. He said that since nobody wanted him, he decided to destroy everyone else. Then he leaned in closer and told me he had HIV. He laughed, saying that Olivia was definitely infected now and would be joining him in hell soon enough. I didn't react to his words at all. I just stared at him with hollow eyes. I felt completely detached from the world of the living. He took my silence for weakness and kept taunting me, thinking he had one. He asked me how it felt to be so helpless and angry. He bragged that since he was already in custody, the worst he'd face was a prison sentence, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. His laughter sounded like something from a nightmare, sharp and grating. It stopped abruptly when I lunged forward and buried a pair of heavy gardening shears into his chest. He looked down at the blades in total shock, his eyes bulging. I leaned in and whispered that I was dying anyway, so we might as well go to hell together. I put my full weight behind the shears and drove them deeper into his heart. Blood started spraying from his mouth as he stumbled backward. The police officers and onlookers stood frozen in shock for a split second before they finally realized what I had done. Officer Thompson tackled me and pulled me away from the body. He kept yelling that I was insane and that Jerry would have died in prison anyway. He couldn't understand why I would throw my life away for a monster. I knew exactly what I was doing, but I wasn't willing to wait for the law to take its course. I looked down at his body and felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I stumbled over to where she lay and took one final look at her kind face. I gently pried one of the small persimmons from her cold hand. I took a bite of the fruit and found it was incredibly sweet. Jerry died before the ambulance even arrived. Once I was processed into the prison system, I let go of my last shred of will to live. Without that drive, the cancer began to consume my body at a terrifying speed. Officer Thompson felt sorry for me and managed to pull some strings to get me moved to a hospice facility. He looked devastated when he visited, but I just gave him a weak smile. I told him not to worry because it would all be over in a few days. I could feel my organs failing and knew I was down to my final hours. Somehow, Olivia found out where they were keeping me and started making a scene, demanding to be let in. I drifted in and out of consciousness, and when I finally opened my eyes, she was sitting there by my bed. Her eyes were swollen and red from crying. She reached out and asked if I was okay. I just closed my eyes again, refusing to even acknowledge her existence. She started sobbing, asking why I hadn't told her I was sick. She kept saying that if I had just said something, the doctors could have saved me. I asked her what exactly was worth saving. I asked if she wanted me to live, just so I could keep being her human puppet, or so she could have someone else to slap. She froze, her hand hovering over mine as the guilt hit her. She begged me to stop and insisted that she had learned her lesson. She told me She had even written to the judge to plead for leniency in my case. She kept crying about how she couldn't be left all alone. I told her it was far too late for apologies. I opened my eyes one last time and looked at her with pure indifference. I told her that our relationship died the second she wrote those words in her journal, and there was no coming back from that kind of betrayal. I gave her one final piece of advice and told her she needed to get a full medical screening immediately. I told her she knew exactly what she had been doing and who she had been with. She bolted upright, the color draining from her face. She started fidgeting with her shirt and asked me what I knew. I just gave a weak, mocking laugh and told her she already knew the answer. She grabbed her things and scrambled for the door in a blind panic. As she reached the handle, I told her to never come back because the mere sight of her was enough to make me vomit. She flinched as if I had struck her, but she didn't say another word before fleeing the room. The world finally went quiet after she left. I felt myself sinking into a deep, final sleep. In my dreams, I saw my grandmother smiling and waving at me. She was standing right next to the old woman, and they were surrounded by everyone I had ever loved. My parents were there, and so were all the friends I had lost along the way. They were all looking at me with so much love and joy. I felt a sense of pure, overwhelming happiness wash over me. It felt like I was being lifted up by invisible hands, floating toward the light at the edge of the sky. The sounds of the hospital machines faded into nothingness. I started running toward my family, leaving the pain of the real world behind. I was finally finished with this life. I had finally found where I belonged. This time, nothing would ever tear us apart again. When one is stripped of all worldly attachments, they attain the most absolute form of freedom. Lucas's death is no tragedy. It is a celebration of his liberation from the shackles of being a substitute and his return to his authentic self.